Yes, I know. You know what? My producer and backstage. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Listen, thank you so much for joining Tammy. My producer has been sick, as you all know. She's had COVID and she's still having some effects from that. But anyway, we're going to continue to pray for her. Listen, want to thank you all for joining me always here on Tammy. I really appreciate it. And listen, this is Black History Month. We are celebrating Black African American men. And since the show started, you've been consistent. And so I just want to tell you, thank you again. You know, I always do what's on my mind, but today, what's on my mind is talking to these two amazing men. I've got to bring them on out because guess what? They are powerful, and I am blessed that they are on the show today. So I want to talk about and introduce you to the first amazing Black African American man on tonight's show. He's an award-winning CEO of one of the nation's largest Black-owned construction firms, C.D. Moody Construction Company. He's an author of Fighting Through the Fear, My Journey of Healing from Childhood Sexual Abuse. He's a devoted and loving husband and father. He's a brother, a friend to many, and a philanthropist. He has received several recognitions and awards, and guess what? For 2 decades, his company has appeared every year on Black Enterprise Magazine's top 100 list of the nation's largest Black-owned industrial services companies. The Atlanta Business Chronicle ranks his firm as one of Atlanta's top 25 commercial contractors and top 100 private companies. His awards include, listen to this, y'all, Build Georgia Award, Minority Contractor of the Year by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and he was invited to the White House. And just in this year of 2021, he was named one of Atlanta's 500 most powerful leaders. Now, that's just to name a few, folks. I can't name it and keep going down the line, but I'm telling you what, this is the trailblazer, Mr. David Moody, and I'm going to bring him out. Come on out, Mr. David Moody.
What's up? How's it going?
Hey,
how's it going?
What's going on? Listen, now, you know, with every great man, there's a beautiful and great woman. Where is Miss Carla?
Carla, come over here and say and wave to the crowd. Come on over here and say wave to the crowd. Keep coming. There you go. There you are. You see?
Hey, Miss Carla. I'm doing well. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing, Mrs. David, with us tonight. I know, you know, this is family time. I know it. Listen, but I just want to thank you all for being on the show and for all that you're doing. Bye, Carla. Bye, Miss Carla. Okay, listen, Mr. David, all those things that I talked about, I mean, powerful man. Your book is filled, it's riveting. It's filled with family stories, love, laughter, tears, life lessons, and business advice, all in one. So, David, I want to get started, and I hope you don't mind me calling. I've been saying Mr. David.
Please call me David.
So I want you to talk about your family in detail, because in the beginning of the book, you really delved deep into your family history. Why was that important?
Because I think it was important to share where I get a lot of my energy, where I get the things that I think about, try and do. You know, my grandfather, my dad's father came to America at 17 in 1901 from British Honduras, which is now Belize. He worked his way over on a banana boat. He knew no one, but he wanted an education so bad because for a Black man in British Honduras at sixth grade was as far as he could go. So at 17, he had only been to sixth grade. So he came to America. He knew he was coming to Jim Crow and segregation, but he wanted an education that bad. They put him back in sixth grade at 17, and he went on and finished college. He married my grandmother, had 8 children. They lived in a shotgun house. He never owned a car, but all 8 of his children, they have advanced degrees. Then my mother's mother, they're sharecroppers right up the road here from Atlanta in Social Circle, Georgia. They left in 1937 when she was pregnant with my mother, and to Chicago thinking there'd be a better life, and it wasn't. And I just think about what they went through, and then my parents. And so I think of all the ancestors who really worked hard for me to be where I am today.
Wow. And you know, Mr. David, one of the things that I love about in the book, you talk about your grandmother, and you said that one thing, her quote, hard work is good for the body and mind. Fresh air is good for your body. Laughter is good for you. That's what she told you. She taught me that no matter how tough things might be in life, bitterness was unhelpful. She said, always laugh daily. And do you
Yep.
live by that today? You
I sure
still.
do. Yes. I mean, I love the outdoors, regardless of how bad things are. I try and pick myself up. I try and find a reason to laugh and smile every day and have the same for those around me because, especially as I've aged, I realize time is our greatest asset. And it's
Mhm.
up to us to kind of how we feel about things and what we go through. Because, Carla and I went through some really tough times and, trying to raise our family, have money, just enough to live. So you kind of look back and realize you survived,
Yeah.
and things, you just keep going. So you just got to keep going because, life just changes on a dime sometimes.
Yes, it does. And I'm finding that out more so now with us going through COVID and everything that we're going through than
Right.
it was back then. I want to show this picture of you. You just talked about
Sure.
how you love the outdoors.
That's right.
That's you in the outdoors, right?
Yes. Love.
Wow. You know, Mr. David, I want to talk about this business journey that you're on. First of all, one of the things that struck me was how were you able to have your family buy into your dreams? Because going into construction, being an architect, construction, draftsman, the whole thing, that is a big dream, especially for an African American man.
Right. So, well, I tell you how it was kind of by accident. What really happened, I was a staff architect with Bechtel Power Corporation, one of the largest engineering construction companies in the world. I took a field assignment and fell in love with construction. But like many people who can relate to this, I got married. I got married in 1983, and my parents lived 2 miles to the left. Her parents were 2 miles to the right. And after about 8 months of that, I said, you know what? If we're going to be happily married, we're getting out of here. So I found a job in Atlanta with a small company. Carla had never lived anywhere but Ann Arbor, Michigan. I said, look, I'm taking you to where I went to college in Atlanta. I got this great small company that's hiring me, and I'm going to move up, blah, blah, blah. Let's go. We left great jobs. And 2 months later, that company goes bankrupt. Now I don't have a job. And now, what I thought was my worst day actually became my best day because over the next 4 years, I worked for small companies and, we were struggling. So I was able to small little loan and an opportunity came for a project. And I just decided, we're so broke. What do we have to lose? That went in business. I was scared to death. I was just hoping I could make it long enough that I wasn't embarrassed, and I didn't look like a fool. And as they say, the rest is history.
Wow. And so what would you tell someone who wants to go into business today and live their dream? What would you say to them?
First of all, and this is the part of entrepreneurship I underestimated and I didn't even think about, because most of us who go into business have never been uh, presidents of a company, a vice president, any senior position. So we realize we're pretty much really green trying to figure it out. And this is the advice I would give people now. One would be to understand when you become an entrepreneur, you give up a part of you for as long as you're an entrepreneur. What I mean by that, you have no downtime, no free time. Even though you might take great vacations and stuff, you're always thinking about the business. How do you fix this problem? When's the next job coming? All kind of stuff. And then if you're in the business like construction, you eat what you kill. You're constantly on the hunt. But I think the biggest thing that I underestimated was the responsibility of making payroll. And I'm very proud to say in 33 years, I've never missed a payroll or been late. But
Wow.
that's that's the part I didn't That's the part I underestimated as an entrepreneur is when you get employees, you're responsible for them. They're looking at you. They're counting on you to make sure they can pay their family, raise their family, pay their bills. And that check got to be good every week, every 2 weeks. I mean, it's crazy. But I've been in it so long now, I don't know any better. But that's the part I underestimated.
And then, as you talk about your first 10 years, your first 10 years of business, you said in no particular order, you had some life lessons and business lessons. And so one of those was make sure it's your passion you're chasing and not the money.
Right.
And so as you're talking about this, you and Miss Carla, you all moved from Chicago, moved here, the job stopped in 2 months. Money was tight. I mean, you talk about it the whole time. So
right.
It was more about your passion than it was about the money, correct?
Oh, most definitely. But there's a part about the passion that I kind of added that I tell people to be careful of. There's a difference between having a passion and knowing what you're good at doing. My passion was architecture. I've been wanting to do that since I was a kid. And I I graduated from architecture school and started my career as an architect. But I realized I could be a great builder. I could take that knowledge of architecture. So you got to be careful. So there's a difference between quitting and changing direction. Because you can have a passion for singing, but if you can't sing, you ain't gonna. But you could be a great songwriter or a great producer or a great whatever. So you got to understand the difference between a passion and what you can be good at doing. There's a big difference.
And as you're talking about that, David, it reminds me of the gift. It's
right.
more like you say, what is your gift that you had? The other thing that you talked about in the first 10 years of business was fight through the fears that hold you back, whether those fears are real or imaginary. Talk about that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, one of the things I learned that we have to be so careful of fear, and that's why I named my book, Fighting Through the Fear. Fear stops us more than anything else. You hear me? I mean, fear, because the fear of failure, the fear of people laugh at me. I mean, we create our own fear before we try. Like we'll say, I want to try this or try that, and we start telling ourselves, you're not gonna make it. Why are you trying? Blah blah blah. So I call that imaginary fear. I mean, there's real fear we have to have. I mean, you don't go play with a lion, in the jungle or play with a bear or something like that. So that's a fear we got to be, but we got to stop having that fear of trying, that fear of failure. Because here's the thing my daddy taught me. Only two things can happen when you try. Either you make it or you don't, but at least you try.
That's right. That's right. Well, listen, David, I want you to come back because, this is a whole hour that I can talk to you about business, but I really want you to delve into fighting through the fear. I want us to talk about this journey of healing in your book, dealing with sexual abuse. And so how did writing this book help you deal with that?
Well, it was very helpful for a number of reasons, but the first part I think is important, and I talk about this in the book and how this even came about. I had started a blog to celebrate 25 years in business. And every week I was telling a year in business. So when I get to the fourth week, it's 1992. And that's the year my whole life changed. I'm 36 years old and I'm telling this story about what, we have been doing, trying to grow the business, and we're getting awards and stuff. And then my wife found out somebody close to her had been sexually abused. And I just blurted it out. It happened to me. I had planned on dying with my secret. Well, after a couple, 3 months, I started having panic attacks and everything. I had no idea what had happened to me as a 9-year-old was impacting me as a 36-year-old. Then I had a complete breakdown out of town. And at the same time, my wife's mother's dying of a brain tumor. So I'm thinking I must have a brain tumor or something because I'm having uncontrollable muscle tremors. My body is falling apart. I've actually had a complete breakdown, but I couldn't stop because my business was only 4 years old. So I had to basically suffer in silence. So fast forward to 2012, I get therapy, a little therapy just to understand it. But fast forward to 2012, I started thinking a lot about how I felt feeling all alone because I was suffering in silence. And it was that moment that I said, you know what? I'm gonna start sharing my story about healing, anxiety, panic attacks, PTSD, being a survivor, turning trauma into triumph, because I don't want another person to suffer in silence. I think that is the worst thing we could ever do.
Yeah, you know, as I was reading this book, as I told you, it brought a lot of feelings for me as well. Talking about anxiety and talking about the
Right.
thoughts, and so when you talk about that, I want to shift because you talk about anxiety, you talk about the thoughts. What about that with challenging? How challenging was that for you to run your business?
I tell you, I recently went back about 4 months ago because I still have been having anxiety pretty a lot. And I finally went and got a trauma therapist because I finally realized what had happened to me was trauma.
Hmm.
And the best thing I ever did was getting a trauma therapist. I had it, and I've been doing cognitive behavior therapy,
Hmm.
and it's changed my life for the better. Um, and I just finally feel free. But for the first time in my life, I'm gonna actually be running my business where anxiety is not the driving force that I'm fighting or dealing with. So for the first 32 years and 10 months, I was trying to run a business and at the same time dealing with my past and dealing with anxiety and trying to hide it so no one knew how bad it was. And that's the other reason I speak up because I want people to be able to be as creative and great as they can be. But if you got something that's holding you back, you gotta deal with it. Plus, I want us not to be ashamed or afraid to deal
Hmm.
with mental health. Doesn't mean you
Hmm.
crazy or something, but
That's right.
anxiety, panic attacks, PTSD are very real. And I think the other thing that I try and share, and I've learned, I did nothing wrong. I was a child. I was taken advantage of. But when you're going through that, you blame yourself. You feel like you messed up. It's all your fault. So I try and
Hmm.
help people understand the journey because there's so many people who will say they've been abused in some form, but they don't talk about how they had to deal with it or the anxiety. Because if you say you have any of those things, we tend to think you're weak. So
Right.
especially as a man, I didn't want people to think I was weak or they wouldn't want to do business with me.
Right, right. You know, and talking about that, as I said, amazing men, and you're a Black African American man. How did you come to deal with that in saying, you know what, it's all right for me to share. It's all right for me to tell somebody. How did you come to how was it coming to that realization as a man?
I think for me, I was able before 92, I could keep myself busy, so my mind, I didn't have to be alone with my mind to remember. I had buried it, suppressed it, but I didn't like when I finally started having panic attacks and all that kind of stuff. I'm like, I don't want to live like this, and I didn't want to start using alcohol or
Hmm.
drugs to even sleep or feel better. So I said, this isn't going to work, and I never felt that I didn't tell people because I was afraid they wouldn't do business with me. But I also was smart enough to know I'm a father and a husband and a businessman. I need to get this solved or else I won't make it. And
Right.
that's why I went. And then eventually I decided I would share my story because I don't want anyone to suffer in silence. We should not have to do that.
Yeah. And you know, David, for you to have this book and for you to be able to talk about it, I mean, you're to be commended because a lot of people hide their abuses and they keep them inside. They don't share them. You know, they may
Right.
write them down and talk about them like you say. But for you to be able to do this, I mean, this book should be a bestseller. I'm telling folks, you got to get it. You got to get this book.
Yeah,
I'm serious.
and I
And
appreciate it.
yeah, I appreciate you. I want to ask you this, and this is about the 9-year-old David talking to the now 60 plus, whatever that is.
Right. 64,
60,
64. I'll be
64.
65 in May. I'm proud of my age because I can
21st.
still juice on it.
I got you. Listen, so what would the 9-year-old David say to the 64-year-old David today?
Actually, 64-year-old Dave talking to the 9-year-old. Because one of the
Okay.
things I learned from cognitive behavior therapy, which is why my anxiety was so bad, I kept treating my 9-year-old self like it was an adult. And I finally came and been able to accept and realize I was only 9 years old. I was not an adult. I didn't know how to stop it. So that's, I finally flipped so I could finally realize, I've been treating myself as a child, going through this like I'm an adult. I should have known how to stop it, how not to be groomed. And that's why so often when younger people ask me a question about life or business, I always start off, I'm giving you an answer from a man who is 64 or whatever age I might have been. I said, so the answer I'm going to give you is an answer filled with life experiences. It's not the same answer I might have gave you at 35 or 25 or 45. So I always start that off when I give an answer to people when they ask me certain questions about anything, because what I've learned is how much we gain as we live life.
That's right. Wow. Wow. We could talk all day. I'm telling you, Mr. David, it's so much to unpack in this book, and I can't unpack it all in this half an hour with you. But I want to go back because you talk about the fact that in the book you started blogging. And so I know that blogging was good for you, and that's Moody Speaks. Talk about that blogging and talk about how, because you have the other sexual abuse survivors that tell their stories. So tell us a little bit about that.
One of the things I started realizing, I wasn't one of those guys who wanted to go to some big group session and be singing Kumbaya in the woods dealing with this. There's nothing wrong with that. That's just what me. So I realized I wanted to create a place that had resources, other successful survivor stories where a person could go in private and read, hear, see, know where to call, and just start their journey of healing. And so often we don't have that. So that's why I really started that, was to help people realize how to heal. They can heal. They can have an incredible life, but they could do it at their pace and private. And one of the things I always tell loved ones or people who support the survivor, you can't push a survivor to go before they're ready. And that's why I also share my story. And Carla talks about, what it was like trying to navigate, because I've known a lot of people's relationships broke up from panic attacks and breakdowns because the other person just couldn't manage it. And, I was very fortunate that Carla's a registered nurse and a hospice nurse, but I always tell people in relationships, there's going to come a point in each of your relationship with each person where something's going to go down where you're either going to run to that person or you're going to run from them. And Carla and I always run to each other. We never run from each other.
Wow. Okay, I'm going back. Love story, y'all. Love story, fighting through the fear. And so, I didn't ask you about Dr. Charles Cherry.
Right.
You all, yes, you all wrote the book together. You wrote the book together. So how did you all start this? I mean, when did he find out? Because I didn't read that in here.
He didn't find out until no, my close buddies knew pretty much in the early 90s once I had the breakdown and stuff. My very close friends knew my wife, but nobody knew in business or anything because I was really afraid they would think, I was crazy or, This guy's not gonna make it. So that's what I mean by suffering inside. But the people very close to me knew. And Chuck and I were roommates as freshmen, and we're fraternity brothers. He played a semester before me, but he's a writer and a media person. And once I did my whole blog series, and he and I was sitting down one day. I said, man, I need to write a book, but I don't know how to write a book because I hate reading. But so anyway, he sent me the questions. He helped me put it together, and we self-published it. And we found a person to do all the typesetting and formatting, and we just did it together. And it's been very helpful for him because he took a lot of what I gave to realize how to deal with anybody who deals with trauma, because trauma comes in many forms, and it can eat you alive if you don't get it handled.
That's right. So now I do want to say, how do we get the book? Do we go through?
Sure. I'll tell you. You can, if you want an autograph copy, you go to moodyspeaks.com, and there it is. And I will definitely autograph it for you. Or you can get it on Kindle and Amazon, or you can buy a paperback at Amazon for those who just want to use their Prime, Amazon Prime or whatever. So you can get it 3 different ways.
That's right. And David, I'm gonna show all these handles. People don't realize. Sure. Man, you're 64 years old. You're doing it. Now, that's not old. To me, that's not old. No, but people, these young kids go. So anyway, you got IG, right?
Right. Yeah.
You got Twitter.
Yeah.
You got Facebook.
Yep.
And I don't have your LinkedIn page, but they can always go to LinkedIn as well. So fighting through the fear. On the last question I want to ask you, well, I got 2 more questions I want to ask you. One is, what do you want to say to someone who is watching today that may have gone or is going through some type of abuse, sexual, physical, mental? What would you want to say to them?
Well, first of all, you're not alone on this journey, and it's not your fault. When you can, get away from that environment. Get the help and counseling you need. But I think the most important thing is don't lose and give up your faith. There are a lot of good people out here, and you can have the most incredible life if you don't give up. And that's what I would say to anybody who's going through any type of abuse situation now.
Oh, wow. So I said I had 2 more questions. I got
Go ahead.
Two more. Okay. All right.
Go ahead.
So as we are coming to a close, what are the takeaways that you want people to get from this interview and our conversation?
Sure. One is dream big. I didn't dream big. I just hoped I had a decent job. I didn't expect a lot of myself as far as in business. So I exceeded my dreams very early in my life as far as entrepreneurship. So dream incredibly big. Love. I mean, love. Let yourself love and let yourself receive love, but the right kind of love, positive love. And the other thing that's important is be present. And what I mean about being present, not physically present only, but be emotionally and spiritually present when you're with people you love or you want to know. Really be there. Because so often when I was dealing with anxiety, I would be physically there, but I'd be worrying about, am I going to have a panic attack or just anxiety? And I missed a lot of things emotionally because I was too busy trying to navigate the trauma. So that's what I would say anyway.
Wow. Dream big, love, and be present. So then the final thing is, what are the 3 words that describe David?
Funny, at least to myself, I am.
You are.
I'm a motivator, and what I mean by that, I try and motivate people even when we're down, because I do that for myself. And I think the 3rd thing is caring. I care.
Wow. Funny, which you are. I tell you, in the book, folks, you got to get this book, Fighting Through the Fear, My Journey Through the Fear. My journey through fear.
Yes. Right. Actually, my journey is my journey of healing from childhood sexual abuse.
I tried to put it all there.
That's okay. You good.
Thank you. Listen, and then you said motivate. This book will motivate you. It's going to move you to, if you have a dream and you can see this man, Mr. David Moody, what he's done. Incredible, incredible. And then caring. It's all through the book, how you cared for your family, your wife, and your children. And so, David, with that, I want to tell you, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. You know.
Sorry.
You know. Thank you so much, David. Listen, I look forward to seeing you on the show soon. Coming up in another time where we're gonna have the whole hour, and we're just gonna go at it. Thank you so much, David. Bye. Bye, Miss Carla. Okay. Bye-bye. Listen, if you all didn't get anything from that interview, I mean, you say, you funny, David. Yes, he is. Inspiring, honest, outdoorsy, loving husband and father. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I mean, we have some great comments. Listen, David, I just want to tell you and Carla, thank you again so much for being on the show. And I look forward to seeing you coming up in the year. And so right now, folks, just sit back, relax, enjoy, because we're going to play a commercial and we'll be right back.
Our roots are strong, our culture rich, our presence powerful. Our vibrant, colorful swag can be seen in everything we touch. Let's celebrate us and everything we are. The blueprint of food, music, and soul. For an immersive weekend of African American culture, dynamic musical acts, delicious food, cultural vendors, and more. Join us in Charleston for the Root of Soul J19 Fest. Low country roots, African heritage, Black soul.
I'm back. Yes, we are back. And we just had the conversation with David Moody of CD Moody Construction Company. And now you're going to meet another amazing man. This amazing man is another Black African American man. He's a transformational speaker, certified life coach, author of The 5 Stages of Incarceration, the book right here. He's a devoted husband, father. He has been featured in several media outlets, and he is the executive director and founder of the organization Path to Redemption. He has an outreach program to aid the homeless population, and he works with youth. And at 19 years old, he was sentenced to serve life in prison with the eligibility of parole after serving 22 years and 5 months. Without further ado, I'm going to bring him out, and that's Mr. Lester Young. Mr. Lester, how are you, sir? You're on mute.
Blessings to you.
Blessings to you too, my brother. Listen, I am just so blessed that I have had these amazing men. First, Mr. David, and now Mr. Lester.
Yeah, great.
So how's your family doing?
We great. All praises be to God. We're great. Everything's great, family. Thank you.
Wonderful. Tell your wife if she's watching, or the baby girl, tell them I said hello.
Will do.
All right. Listen, I want to talk to you about your book, because one of the things that you said was the power of choices changes your directions in life.
Yeah.
And so this book, as I told you when we first talked, it's not so much about being incarcerated. It's not just for the incarcerated. It's for everybody. Because as I was reading the book, Lester, it kind of, your book as well as David's book, it kind of made me go back and look at my life and write down things again and kind of think about, okay, where do I need to be? What do I need to be doing? How do I need to be doing that?
Yeah.
One of the things, and you said that you are transparent. And so I want to delve right into it, because I want to ask you, the thing that struck me the most was you said the deepest regret as it is related to you was saying anything to your mother that morning you left for school.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, typical 16-year-old, we all have been that age, 16 years old, where we don't, when our parents tell us to do something, a chore or something like that, we don't really think about, the argument or the disagreement you may have with your parents. And that's with me. One day I came home from school and I remember my mom asked me to wash the dishes, but I always wanted to run out of the house and go play with my friends. And I was like, "Mom, I don't want to wash some dishes at this time. I'll wash it when I get back." And she was like, "You need to wash these dishes." So we got in a little disagreement. I remember washing the dishes, and I left immediately out of the house, came back into the house for dinner, didn't say anything to my mom's. And that morning, my father said, "Hey, I need you, being that you're the oldest, I need you to stay home with your moms." I was like, "Nah, I'm not staying home." And I walked out of the house to go to school. And 3 hours later, I found that one of my cousins picked me up, me and my sisters, and told us that our mother had passed away that morning, and I never, but out of my 16-year-old arrogance and pride or whatever that was going on at 16 years old, I regretted not going into that room and kissing my mom like I normally would do every morning before going to school. I felt like she needs to come and apologize to me. And that was just my stupidity as a 16-year-old. And to this day, I still regret not going into that room and apologizing to her and kissing her and tell her good day. Tell her bye as I walked out of the door to go to school.
And Lester, that's one of the things that we have just been, as people, we need to really talk to our young people, because
Mm-hmm.
you said something very important. You were 16 years old.
Mm-hmm.
You had your own mindset. You think you're a man. I get it.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't talk to our young people about the importance of life. And especially right now, one of the things I want to ask you about is, in each chapter of your book, you start out with a quote. Now, these quotes are powerful because they're by different people, including Mark Twain, Robert South, the English churchman, Aristotle, the Greek philosopher, Leah LaBelle, the singer. So do you use these quotes in your daily life to keep you going?
Yes. Going back in that book, I wrote that book while I was serving time in prison. At 19, I was given a life sentence. And at that time, here it is, I'm sitting in prison, broken, shattered, now dealing not only with the guilt of me losing my mom, still processing that 18 months later. Now I'm dealing with the fact that I took another human being life, and how do I cope with all of that, all these pain and guilt that I was enduring at that time. And I just started reading. One of the prison chaplains encouraged me to read a book by James Allen called As a Man Thinketh, So Is He. And at this time, I was 19 years old, reading at a 7th grade level education. Education reading was not my thing at this time. But this book, he continued emphasizing, read this book. And I was like, why should I read a book? And he was like, because there's two prisons that we live in. You're living in a physical prison now, but there's also a mental prison. He said, you may have a long prison sentence, but he said, you can learn how to cope with your time in prison by changing your mindset. And that's when I began this journey of transformation, redemption, reading, and just seeking a way to make amends for the actions in which led to my incarceration, but also healing from a lot of the broken things that I experienced growing up, So it was a whole host of stuff that I needed to address. And unfortunately, me sitting in prison for murder forced me to address these issues, as they say, peeling the onion back and begin to address who I really was. And I always tell people, I go back to that 16-year-old kid that when my mom died, I suppressed that pain. My father, we didn't have a conversation about it. I just pushed it in, and I sought materialism, things to cover up that pain, drinking, smoking weed, violence, anything that I could use to cover pain, I did. But in prison, I wasn't able to use those things any longer. It was that man in the mirror type situation for me. That's when I began that process.
Wow. And you talk about that process, especially when you talk about the fact that you had to get away from negativeness even in prison.
Yeah.
And how was that for you? Because when you're in prison, I mean, I don't know what happens. You only see it on TV. Some of us, and what you see on TV, they tell you, well, we got to be with this gang or you got to be with that gang. How did you really survive so that you could, what was your survival technique?
When I sit back, Tammy, and I think about it, it was only by the grace of God that I survived the environment. And not, when I made that choice, go back again to what I said earlier, is that when I decided to heal myself, that broken part of who I was that I was running away for so long, in me healing myself, I found my voice. I found a voice that was willing to speak up for me now. you know, and not allow my peers and the environment to speak for me. I started speaking for myself. And because I started speaking for myself, I started determining what path I was going to take, regardless if it was going to be travel with my homeboys or not, in prison or not. I was going to be that man that's going to stand on his own. And by the grace of God, he parted that environment for me. He kept me safe for 22 years in prison. I never had one altercation inside of a prison system that was threatening to me, you know, because God kept me safe, because I chose to heal. And from healing, I chose my voice. And when I started doing that, my friends and those inside of the prison environment, they was like, something different about this dude. He's reading a book, and he's on the rec field reading a book while we're playing basketball. I chose not to play basketball because I knew that that was an environment where violence took place, fights took place on the basketball court. So I would choose reading a book. I would choose sitting down, finding someone that I could have a conversation with about, let's focus on a word a day. Like I would say, I find friends, I'll give them 10 words, and we'll sit on the bench and study 10 words every day. And we would have to use these words in a sentence. I started building my tribe that was focused on the same thing I was focused on. That was a path to redemption after I found my voice, my authentic voice that God gave me.
Wow. And so, Lester, you said you were 16 years old, right, when you went into prison, correct?
Mm-hmm. No, 16 when my mom's passed away.
16 when your And
I went to prison at 19.
19, that's right. Mm-hmm. And at 19 years old, when did you find your authentic voice? I mean, because you talk about it, that had to be like a process. How long was that process before you found your authentic voice?
It took about 3 years. It took about 3 years, because in prison, you go into, as you see, the first stage of my book, the first stage of incarceration was denial.
Right.
I went into prison in the state of denial about everything that was a compound that created and shaped my decision making and everything. I was in denial about a lot of stuff. I didn't realize how all of those years after my mom's died at 16, I was still grieving my mom's death. I was still living with that guilt. I was still carrying that. The day I got arrested, I remember something told me to go to the grave site where my mom was buried. I didn't visit that site where my mom was buried for years. On the day before I got arrested, I went there, and I remember laying on her grave in a fetus position, crying to her. Like, finally, as unfortunate as it was, here as I'm about to be arrested for murder, but now this is my time where I wanted to finally go back and say, Mom, I'm sorry. But even after that, 3 years into my prison sentence, I was still in denial. But it was one night I remember vividly. I remember one night I woke up crying out of my sleep, because I was thinking about, I watched this show in Dateline. It was talking about how a person, a woman who lost her loved one due to gun violence, murder. And for the first time of that, in my imprisonment, I realized that I did the same thing to someone else's family, that I took another human being's life. And to hear that mother like crying, uncontrollably crying because of the pain and anguish that a person caused her and her family from taking their loved one's life. I remember laying in that bed. I went to bed that night. A couple hours later, I woke up out of my sleep crying and feeling heavy. And I remember jumping off the bed, and I went on the floor, and I got in a fetus position, and I stayed there for hours crying and praying and talking to God. And something told me, said, like God whispered, said, I have forgiven you, but you have to make peace with the person that you took his life. And for 3 years, I never wanted to speak about this person's name. I didn't want to say anything about him. But God was like, don't pray to me. I'm already forgiven you, but you have to see forgiveness from the one that you have taken his life. And that's when uncontrollably again crying. And I remember mentioning his name, and I say his name with respect to his family. His name is Gary Goldinger. I never in many years never wanted to say his name, but I had to say his name. And that's like God was like, until you say his name, you will not be free. You will continue to have this heavy burden upon you. Say his name, speak to his spirit, and make peace with that. And from there, your life will be different. And I remember sitting in that fetus position, and that's when I made that promise to God, but most importantly to Gary Goldinger. I was like, in this night, I will live my life differently. I will honor your life, and I will do everything within my ability to help protect your legacy by your name, by respecting your name. Your family will never see me as this person. I mean, and in spite of the crime that I've committed, I would say that one day they will look up me on a prison. I don't never want them to say that, oh, he went to prison, he continued that lifestyle of violence. I was like, if they would ever pull me up on SEDC.com, I want them to see that I have used this bad experience in a way of honoring their son by doing something different, by saving lives of the men who had a parole date, who were actually going home. How do I save them from going back in the community to not harm someone else? And that was my commitment to this day. And it's 27 years. I did 20, 30 years ago. I experienced that, and to this day, I walk with that same promise I made to Gary inside of my prison cell.
Wow, you know, man, Lester, to hear you talk about that, you know, it does something to me right now. I'm trying to get it together, okay? But talking about and as you talked about that, the first thing that I heard was release.
Yeah.
Fetal position, crying, release. Yeah, I know tissues. Everybody talking about it. I know, man. You're powerful. You're powerful. Let's talk about the 5 stages, because you talked about self-denial was the first. The anger part.
Yeah.
How did you manage the anger part? Because it took you 3 years, as you said, to really get your authentic voice. Was part of the anger during that 3-year period as well?
Yeah, my anger. I was never really a violent person, but I knew that I would get angry just like anybody else, and release my anger in some verbal way or some physical way, you know, knocking things over. But I learned that the tip of the iceberg is not what we should pay attention to. It's always beneath the surface. And this is where I was like, people were paying attention to, hey, Lester committed this crime, murder. You know, he committed murder, and they only saw the tip of the iceberg. They didn't see all of the other painful things that was taking place that build up to this tip that caused the explosion. So what I had to do was step back from that and say, where's this anger coming from? It's not coming from me and a guy disagreeing in prison, or me and a guy disagreeing out when I was out in the world at that time. It was coming from something way deeper than that. It was coming from a lot of pain and a lot of brokenness. It came from a low self-esteem that I didn't want nobody to see this weak young boy, a skinny young kid at 16 years old. So I did everything I could to protect him. And if that meant me being angry and being violent, I did it. But when I realized that it was way deeper than the tip, it was something deeper, and I had to fix me. And you mentioned in the book, I mentioned self-denial, anger, and victimization. Those 3 stages that I was going through the first 3 years, it was no ownership for my actions. I didn't want to take ownership for my victim. Like I said, for 3 years, I never mentioned my victim's name. I never wanted to acknowledge his family. You know, and when I look back at it now, I'm like, that's the type of mind that I was in at that time. But after that, God was like, you have to make peace. You have to make peace. You have to say his name, you know, and that spirit. I tell a lot of young kids today that out here engaging in gun violence is like, until you understand, or when you're in that prison cell, it may be cool to be out here shooting people and thinking you done killed someone. It's not going to haunt you. I'm like, until you in that prison cell by yourself one night, in the spirit of that person that you killed, that you just wrongfully took their life for some of the most stupidest things, until that spirit comes in that room and sit with you and you have to process that. A lot of men that I knew in prison couldn't deal with that period. They could not deal with sitting in the room in the spirit of your victim come in that room and challenge you to bring about some change in your life. Some guys attempted suicide. They just couldn't deal with it. But for me, God told me, in order for me to be released, I had to make that amends. I needed to take ownership for everything that I did. And that's where it starts, that redemption for me. So in the 4th stage, as you would see in my book, I mentioned forgiveness.
Right. That
Forgiveness. And it was about that. I mean, like writing letters. I have over 30-some journals that I wrote letters every day. I wrote my thoughts, my feelings, everything in a journal. And being that in South Carolina, you can't have a connection with your victims after you've been sentenced to prison. It's like against the law to reach out to your victims, even after I got out of prison. But I used to write letters to my victim, the person, Gary. I used to address a letter to Gary every day. In my cell, I would write a letter to him, even though I know he would never read it. I would write a letter to his family. I would write a letter to myself, I'm not talking about the adult me. I was writing a letter to the 16-year-old kid that never healed, in order for me to be the adult that I am today. I realized that I had to forgive him. I had to forgive my younger self at that time. And from there, this is where these stages of transformation had to continue allowing me to evolve and move into that prison system for 22 years and put me in the position where I'm at today.
Wow. And where you are today, my brother, is something. Just to hear your story, you know, and as David talked about, you know, we talk about mental illness. We talk about the fact that we don't deal with trauma, especially for a Black man.
Yeah.
You know, you don't deal with it because now people will think that you're weak.
Yeah.
And so when you talk to young men and some young women, what do you tell them? I mean, what are some of the life lessons that you talk to them about?
Is that they have to remove, for young men, they have to remove this hyper masculine identity that they have been given from their community, from their peers, from the music, the movies, the video games. They have this false notion of masculinity that men don't cry, men don't show remorse, men don't do this. These are some of the armors, these false armors that we put on ourselves, or these identities we put on ourselves that affects us. Like I tell a lot of young brothers today that when I talk to them, I'm like, man, I wish I did cry at 16 years old. I wish I did cry when I lost my mother. But for some reason, I could not cry. And because I didn't cry at that time, I cried internally every night. And I tried to find everything to numb that pain. And I couldn't numb the pain. I could not numb the pain, and the only way that pain was able to be numb is that I had to heal. I had to remove that false armor of masculinity and say, man, I'm okay to cry. So here it is. I'm this man who's been charged for murder in prison, and I have a roommate in my cell with me. I had to be comfortable enough to fall on my knees and lay in a fetus position to cry, and didn't even concern myself about him judging me and thinking that I'm a weak person, because I became comfortable as I continued to experience that. I became comfortable with my identity and removing the false notion that men don't cry. So I tell these young people today, young brothers, young men, that you have to learn how to release your emotion in a healthy way. The way that we have been taught to do it, we're hurting ourselves and we're destroying our communities, and we continue to carry out these violent acts in a way of a crying out. Some of these young people are crying out from the internal pain that they have, and they have not learned how to process that. And I was that same young man, couldn't process it either. So I took it out in the streets.
Wow. But you know what, my brother, you're doing it. Path to redemption. You know, you are doing it. I mean, I can talk to you for hours. So I know you're gonna have to come back, right? You're gonna have to come back and talk with me for an hour. But let's talk about Path to Redemption, because I don't want us to run out of time. And I do want you to talk about your organization, because you're doing it. You're working with homeless. You have an outreach program with homeless. You're working with the youth. You are I heard you speak, and I'll tell you what, my brother. And you did 6 minutes in this speech. Hey, baby girl.
Hey, let me finish, baby.
And listen, that's fine. We family.
Yeah.
And so talk about Path to Redemption.
Yeah.
How did you start it? You're the founder and executive director.
Yeah, Path of Redemption actually was a vision started inside of prison. One of my mentors, Rick Jordan, was a business coach that he came into the prison side teaching me about entrepreneurship, business, and he challenged me to say that the law of reciprocity is to learn how to give back to people. So he said, find something that is your why, find your North Star and connect to that North Star. So I said, my North Star is sharing my story to help other people don't make the mistakes that I made. So I wrote out Path of Redemption while I was serving time in prison and started using the principles of Path of Redemption. And it's all about helping and empower and educate those that are currently in prison or formerly incarcerated to make better choices. Because I believe that the power of choices determine your direction in life. So that's where Path of Redemption was an organization was birthed out of prison. When I was in prison, a vision God gave me. And when I came out of prison, I continue to walk out this vision that God gave me in prison, and is to help those that are in need. Well, so when I help the homeless, it's about, because there's so many people who are homeless that are broken, people who need. So it was my way of atoning for the mistakes that I've made, and again, to honor my victim in some way by helping empower someone else. you know, and that's what it's really about. Everything that I do is going back to that promise I made to Gary in prison. It's not about me. It's like I give God the praises, but when you have taken another human being life and you have to live with that, you have to find a way. And I would say this too, is that I'm so thankful that in this journey that God blessed me to have a relationship with the family of Gary to a point where they have forgiven me, his brother and others have now said, hey, we don't hold animosity to you. Just like last time, I just got a text message from one of his brothers. He asking me for advice on stuff. And I was the person that took his brother's life. But he sees the man that I am today, and we talk like that. We constantly like sending messages of like, hey, how you doing? Like when I went up for my pardon, he was one of those individuals that pushed that helped me get a pardon right now. That I got a pardon in September 17, 2020, as a result of the family forgiving me, which was another healing process for me.
Wow. Man, I could talk to you. Are you in between you and David? Y'all just did it for me. I'm like, drop the mic, drop the mic. David backstage laughing. I'm telling you, let me ask you this, because you are a very spiritual man, and I love that because you let God use you.
Yeah.
And what I just want to say to you is continue, my brother, because God is just using you. Your light is shining. And I see it. And we see it. Everybody sees it. Tell someone who's looking now how important a statement that you said, believe in your purpose and stay in your lane.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Like I always tell people, like like your thumbprint is unique. No one has the same thumbprint. Whether your brother and your sister, your mother, no one has this. This is how God designed us, with a uniqueness. And just like this fingerprint, we all have a unique purpose that God has given us. But for some reason, distractions and all of this stuff, we lose sight of that purpose. And when we lose sight of that purpose, it's like we live in this earth. We living on this earth waywardly, just wandering to and fro. But I'm telling you, when you find that purpose, no matter how hard your days are, what challenges you face, you're going to find the energy to move forward. So I found my purpose in prison, that I was able, it helped me survive prison. It's like every morning I woke up in prison, I'm waking up like, yeah, it's a good day. And people looking at me like, wow, you got a life sentence, dude. You will never get out of prison. I said, I don't believe that. You know what I'm saying? Because I believe that my vision and my purpose is so great that God had me in there for a period of time. And until I got myself right, God delivered me. When a lot of people didn't believe I was going to walk out of prison, God said, you have a purpose. And because you connect to that and you find joy in that he bestowed his grace upon me and granted me parole after serving 22 years, which most cases you have a 3% chance of ever making parole on a life sentence in South Carolina. Well, God had a purpose for your life, and it's definitely showing, man. I mean, my brother, you are doing it. I want you to tell us in about a minute. Okay. What would be the takeaway? And I always ask my guests this: what's the takeaway that you want the audience to know? The takeaway is really just focus on your healing. In order for you to be a man or the woman, a husband, a father, heal. All of us deal with a sense of brokenness from something of our childhood experiences, and we bring that into our adult life. Hurt people, broken people broke people. So I would just say, if you take nothing else from my story, understand the power of healing. Take the time to heal yourself. Take the time to go back and have that conversation with that young person that you've been running away from for so long, that you have put in a closet and you don't want to talk to that person no more. Go back and heal that person, and you'll find strength and power in your voice. You'll discover purpose, and you'll have a different mindset as you move through this journey called life. Now, how can we get the book? How can we get this book? I got my book. Go to my website, Path to Redemption. I appreciate your support. You can go to pathtoredemption.org. And with that book also, I just released my second book here called The 5 Stages of Growth. I just released my second book. And it's really just tying in with the growth process, the things that I'm just talking about just a minute ago about healing, finding your voice, finding your purpose and mindset and all that stuff. So. Well, listen, I'm going to get my book. I got this one, so I'm going to get the second one. All right. I want that second one. So, Lester, tell us 3 words that describe you. Purpose-driven, faithful, and loyal. Purpose-driven, faithful, and loyal.
And loyal. Wow. I write down all of these, each guest that I've had on the show for this show since August. I write this down because what that does is it tells me a lot about the people, and it tells me some of the things that we're interconnected with. So now I'm going to ask you this. You're going to come back on the show? If I invite you, you coming back?
Yes, sister, I'll definitely be back, and I appreciate your invite. And I just hope that your audience got something out of these two interviews that you've done. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Well, listen, I want to thank you so much, and thank your family for sharing you with me tonight. As I said, I know it's 7:00 at night. I mean, so I definitely want to thank you. All right, Mr. Lester, listen, you take care of yourself. Listen, Pathway, I want people to know path to redemption.org, but also this is the book, The 5 Stages of Incarceration. So I've had two top best-selling authors on today. All right. Hey, I'm gonna bring David back here before we go. Dave, hey, thank you all so much.
I want to say, Lester, man, your story was powerful, brother. I really, really enjoyed that.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Same here, man.
Yeah. Thank you all so much for being on the show. These are all the handles for everybody. You have the website so you can get the books. All right. So without further ado, listen, my brothers, I thank you again so much. I'm going to close out the show. Have a blessed evening. All right. Thank you. All right. Listen, you heard these wonderful, amazing men talk on the show. And so anyway, next week we've got 2 other amazing men. Bill Robinson is coming on, and Mr. James Weston out of California. He's an actor and a precision stuntman. Let me tell you, when you meet him, you're going to be like, wow. When you meet Bill, you're going to be like, wow. So I want you all, please pray for my producer A. Please keep her in prayer and subscribe to the channel, the YouTube channel. Let's be a blessing to someone today and every day. Have a wonderful and safe week. And guess what? I'm going to see you next week. And I thank you all for your comments and all. I'm going to see you all next week. And I'm just telling you, amazing men. Don't forget it. Amazing men. All right. The power of the African American Black man. All right. See you next week. Be safe. Bye-bye.